Now that we've discussed the effects of dynamics and tempo on musical form, it's time to move on to another often neglected dimension of the music, orchestration. Not all aspects of the music we hear are equally salient at all times. While analysis tends to focus on harmony, motives, and phrase structure, and these are certainly important, they are not always the things we notice first. When we listen to music from more than one solo instrument, for example, orchestration are the most salient aspects of what we hear. Like dynamics and tempo, it's a huge factor in creating musical character. Imagine the beginning of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, played slowly, pianissimo, by, for example, one flute. Does anyone really think the music would have the same impact? Another point about orchestration, not always appreciated, is that it's not just a matter of timbre. The real essence of orchestration is best summed up in Tubby's phrase, planes of tone. In our Occidental musical tradition, we often combine notes into chords. We also very frequently have musical textures that are not one-dimensional. By this I mean that they feature multiple planes of tone. Here's an example. This example has a melody, a bass line, and accompanying middle parts, 3 planes of tone. In the first 2 bars, the melody is in the oboe, the bass line is in the pizzicato strings, and the secondary parts are in the upper strings. In bars 3 and 4, while the bass remains pizzicato, the melody is in the middle and the accompaniment is on top. This phenomenon, planes of tone, arises from the fact that human perception is not equipped to pay equal attention to many things at the same time. Evolution made us with perceptual priorities. Imagine walking in a forest while chatting with a friend. Your main focus of attention would normally be the conversation, but there are many other noises happening at the same time. The wind in the trees, birds singing, small animals moving around. Now imagine you hear a loud roar nearby. Suddenly your friend is no longer the center of attention. Now you're wondering if there's something dangerous happening. Your perceptual priorities have suddenly changed. This happens all the time when you listen to non-monophonic music. Background planes of tone are critical to much of the best music. Think of the start of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. A vague, mysterious open fifth in tremolo strings and sustained horns becomes the background for a little motivic fragment, the descending fifth. Now listen to it without the tremolos. The motives alone, without the background, sound rather insignificant. The wonderful effect of the passage comes almost entirely from the way the motive emerges from the background. This is a clear demonstration of the importance of orchestral texture, or planes of tone, in creating musical character. A composer who is not aware of this is like a one-footed runner. An important aspect of a composer's sense of form is sensitivity to degrees of contrast. While working on a piece, sometimes something just feels wrong. In these situations, the problem is often that there's too much or too little contrast compared with what came before. Orchestration has an enormous effect here. Let's take our previous example and do a variation. Now the second phrase is orchestrated in a way that emphasizes the contrast with the first phrase. Instead of sounding like a consequent to the first phrase, it's more like an explosive interruption. The musical character is totally changed as a result. Even with one single instrument like the piano, orchestration can vary enormously. Remember, orchestration is not only a matter of tone color, but also involves choices of register, doubling, and spacing. And these elements in turn affect dynamics. Here's the beginning of Beethoven's Sonata, Opus 111. Notice how Beethoven has orchestrated the dynamic contrast. The last beat of the first full bar, the diminuendo, is more thinly scored. When the quiet bar arrives, the lowest register disappears, as does the octave doubling in the left hand. Not only does the pianist play more quietly, the texture itself is reduced. Another way in which orchestration affects musical form is through its ability to mark punctuation and create accent. Perceived musical form has everything to do with salience. Sometimes a transition between two phrases can be much improved just by adding a little trigger like a harp chord or a pizzicato, making the punctuation clearer. Here's an example. Listen to this passage, first without the harp trigger in measure 3, and then with. Similarly, a climax often requires emphasis in the form of an added accent, since accent by definition makes something more salient. In this next example, the timpani adds impact to the climax. Without it, the overall effect is less convincing. Again, let's listen to two versions, first without the timpani, then with. In summary, since timbre and planes of tone are such salient aspects of musical experience, they need to be recognized as such in musical analysis. Decisions about orchestration can drastically affect form and musical character. A composer who has to make decisions about orchestration all the time needs to think about orchestration and trying to understand what makes a given piece of music successful or not.